My brother Jordan, executive director here at the ACLJ, he's in Washington, D.C. This morning, he was a featured panelist at the International Religious Freedom Summit in Washington, D.C., urging the nations to promote religious freedom globally. And this is something, Will, the ACLJ has been involved in many different ways, but now we are seeing some main stage work here from our team.
And I think we should go to that right now and hear some from Jordan before we talk to him in a couple segments from our DC studio. But just from that panel, let's go ahead and roll that.
ACLJ is a nationwide organization, grassroots. You hear from the grassroots every day. Give us some advice on how you translated that energy outside the Beltway to move the needle here in Washington.
So I think what's important is, I think through our entire time at the ACLJ, and we started domestically and then we grew internationally pretty quickly in very diverse kind of places, whether it's Strasbourg, which is our European headquarters, but we're in India, Pakistan, we were in Russia, and we might be again, you know, if the sanctions are lifted and they were able to survive through their legal process there. But we're also in Israel, but our first client after we opened our Israeli office was a Palestinian Christian family whose husband was killed by Hamas. He was the head of the Bible Society in Gaza, and she just needed to get to the West Bank to be reunited with her family. And this was a day before Operation Cast Lead began. We didn't know that at the time. We got the call, though, because Israel knew she was our client, and we had worked at the UN. We had worked to kind of expose us, to the point where Hamas, they went to the gate and they took her there and they said, no one's opening this gate today. And Israel, I was like talking to them on the phone, they said, and these are the stories that work because it brings people in. So the one fan, I'm talking to the Israelis, I've got her, and then she hands the phone to the Hamas guy. I'm like, listen, you can't follow her. When she gets to the halfway point, the gate will open and you need to close your gate immediately. And so I kind of confirmed that with Israel, and it happened. And so you can do that a day before a country goes to war if you push hard enough. That kind of story for years drove supporters of the ACLJ because they realized, wow, this is not just about, an issue that you can resolve in the U.S. civilly or even at the U.S. Supreme Court. This is about saving people's lives. So and most of our faiths call us to do that if we can, to save the innocent. Almost every faith calls for that. So if we're truly practicing our own faith, that's how we talk to our employees. If you're truly practicing your own faith, you can't ignore the issues in your own country. You want to handle those first. Like Melissa said, we have to, if you're going to come doing this from the United States, the U.S. has to be protecting religious liberty here at a very robust level, too. And while I think we are the greatest country in the world when it comes to doing that, we see how quickly things start slipping with our Western allies when the religious speech, also kind of intertwines with political. Like I got back to initially, is that we do understand that robust religious liberty can change a country. And it can, not just its people, but its entire way it's perceived around the world. And so, again, those stories, people understanding how it can make them safer, but also the dictate of their faith. Yeah. Calls them to do something.
Jordan, why don't you give us an update of why you were there, what this was, why it was important to be there, and just get through it.
So it's an event that's put together every year near the National Prayer Breakfast that brings in people from all over the world to hear from really mostly Americans about how we can work on spreading religious liberty internationally. And my panel was actually on. It was the opening panel of the day in the main room. It was on how do we get people to care about this in the Western world. And I think, the first point that almost every panelist made was that we have to take religious liberty serious at home. And that was point one. Point two, and to be a good example to the world. Point three is something that I think we've learned from being at the ACLJ is that you have to be able to tie it to actual stories. It's very difficult when you just say 500 people got killed in some place yesterday because people, it's just something in their head. They hear horrible things in the news every day. But if you can tell the story of an actual client, whether you bring the husband, the wife, the children, that pulls at people's heartstrings, regardless of what faith background they may be. And so that then engages them in the process. So our whole panel was, when all these other things are going on in the world. And I think number two to that is that if you look to countries that have actual religious liberty, which I define as, You can believe in whatever faith you want. You can believe in no faith at all. You should be able to declare it. The government should protect your speech, protect you from those who might want to harm you because of your speech. And you can even create your own faith. I mean, so it's a pretty wide, it's a very American kind of Western idea that would be acceptable to the rest of the world. But in countries that do have that flexibility to some extent, those are likely allies of the United States. Now, every ally doesn't have religious liberty. We know that. But our best allies do. And so the more countries we can get to adopt actual religious liberty, which means protections for all religious people and people who aren't religious at all, the safer the United States is, the less peacekeeping we have to do, Logan, around the world.
Jordan, I think it's important to point out to people as well that today, while you were speaking as a part of this panel, we also were filing at the UN Human Rights Council on Iran, and all these issues tie together. But even how you mention the Western style protection of religious liberty, we also know that we have to continue, and that's what makes the ACLJ so unique, is we fight for religious liberty abroad as well as at home. We've seen the attacks on religious liberty over the past weeks, even here at home. And I think to that audience, being able to reiterate these values that we have in America, even when we know they're under attack constantly, to showcase that this should be the model for the world. How do you think that was received, and even how you were able to explain that to that audience today?
I think, with former Ambassador, Senator, and Governor Sam Brownback, who runs this event with Katrina Lantos Sweat, whose father was a Holocaust survivor, and there's a Lantos Commission on Religious Freedom inside Congress. And so she's very involved in these issues too. There were people from all different faith backgrounds that approached us after I spoke because we talked about our international work that we do as well. It's not just based in America. You've got went through the offices that we have around the world. And I really did that for the audience so that if they saw us walking out, they'd know that we don't just do work here and talk about other places. So I had, though, on stage with me, and I think this is what is important for people to kind of take away. So to my left was Ahmed Shahid. He was the UN Rapporteur for Religious Liberty when Youssef Nadarkhani was in prison and facing death by hanging. So he is who we were working with on that case. To the right of me was Melissa Rogers. She was the Obama administration's head of the faith-based office, and someone who was actually very key in making sure the contraception mandate that a lot of the Catholic churches and hospitals and organizations were opposed to, and even the abortion pill mandate, that wasn't only going to be exempt for churches. She was the one that got the administration to compromise to say that all, any religious group that objects to this, whether or not they're a church or an organization or a hospital, they can do that, and they're not, out of compliance with Obamacare. So, of course, we don't agree on all policies, but it's pretty easy as Americans to agree on religious liberty, that we should be able to believe or not believe what we want and change our views when we want to, without fear of death, without fear of imprisonment. Obviously, we see discrimination against Christians in the United States. We take care of those cases, every single day. What we never want it to become is persecution. We can't allow our country to be a leader on religious liberty and actually, persecuting to the point of not just putting people in prison for a day for a pro-life protest, but not doing anything about a church being stormed, which I believe if the Biden administration was in charge right now, or the Kamala Harris administration, people would not be arrested for storming that church. Those police stood by and let it happen. And that is a story that we want to be, one and done in the United States. Because if those stories get out around the world, they just say, they don't really believe that either.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that you have to take all of that seriously. And look, I think when you saw that really very coordinated, not just protest, but it's a disruption and ending of that church service, I think it woke a lot of people up. I think it woke a lot of church leaders up to how they're going to be able to do security. Because we have different when you have one bad actor that shows up at your church, you can quickly remove them or figure it out. But when you have these groups of 100 plus, what are you going to do in that situation? And a lot of people are calling in and talking about what's going on the world stage. And the ACLJ, as you said, Jordan, has been working in Europe and working all over the world. Some places we can work, some places we can't work anymore. But we are always getting involved wherever we can because, some people have called in and said, we need to make sure that the Western philosophies of American religious values are upheld wherever they can be. And you have places like Europe, which we've worked in for many years, decades now, finally kind of coming around to some of the views that the ECLJ, the European arm of the ACLJ, has held as something very important to us for a long time. And finally, took a couple decades, you are seeing Europe start to respond.
Yes, but you're also seeing the pushback. And so for those leaders like in France, Marine Le Pen, a great example, someone who was going to, she was going, by all poll accounts, was going to win the next presidential election. So what did they do? They charged her with a 15-year-old crime that wasn't a crime. So a retroactive law that changed, and that means she can't be on the ballot. So you've got to then run someone much younger who wasn't as well known. So we see there that is persecution. To me, that's persecution. If you're imprisoning someone because you know they may have a political victory that you oppose, so the French state doesn't want to be, I guess, the Make France Great Again kind of movement. So they push back to the point where they will imprison you and house arrest and make it impossible. And if that happens to you, you can't run for office in France, even while the case is pending. The appeals take years, and so effectively she's now frozen out of political office. That's again the kind of fight we're engaged in Europe to make sure it doesn't go the way of an anti-religious, almost kind of Soviet feeling country where it's embarrassing to even admit that you're religious, or you have to be underground like in so many countries in the Middle East, because if you come above ground, you'll be killed.
Jordan, and once again, as we talk about all these and we remind people that the work, not only here in the United States, but at the ECLJ, never stops. I just wonder if you have one final message to people that what you took away from that Religious Freedom Summit, being able to be on a panel, once again, showcasing that the ACLJ, not just a partisan group, that being on a panel with individuals that come from very different philosophies, mindsets, religious traditions, that religious freedom doesn't have to be partisan. And there are people that even worked within the Obama administrations and other administrations that agree with groups like the ACLJ on this importance of religious freedom.
Because it's that first freedom, in our Bill of Rights. And it's our first freedom because if you actually have religious liberty, and you tie that to there's no religious tests for political office in Article 6 of the Constitution. That doesn't mean you as a voter don't get to decide and judge candidates based off maybe their faith. That's up to you. But the government can't put in a test, and the government can't get involved in your religious faith. If you truly have that, you have a very free society. And isn't that what we want for most of the world, to experience the freedom that we have? But to have that freedom means you'll hear things you don't like. There'll be people with faiths you disagree with, and you have to learn how to live together in harmony as best you can. And that is the American experience and experiment that we're still living in our 250th anniversary.